So recently in the news, there have been various headlines about Venezuela voting to annex or incorporate a large chunk of its eastern neighbor, Guyana. At the time of this video, people are speculating on whether Venezuela will actually send military forces to take this land or not, as well as all of the politics surrounding the situation. But this is not a new conflict so much as the current chapter in an ongoing dispute that has existed since colonial times. This video will not bother trying to justify or denounce either side of the current ongoing events, but rather will explain what events in history have led to this confrontation and how it has shaped the rhetoric around it. After all, one of history's jobs is to help us understand why we are where we are. Guyana is a country in South America about the size of the US state of Kansas, located within the Guyana Highlands. The Guyana Highlands include Guyana, Suriname, French Guiana, and parts of Brazil and Venezuela. Within Guyana is the Essequibo River, which almost splits the country in half. Venezuela is currently claiming the area west of the river, which is fittingly called the region of Guyana Essequiba. Both border claims go back to colonial times for each country. In Venezuela's case, in the early days of Spain's colonial empire, there was an agreed-upon partition of South America between themselves and Portugal from the 1494 Treaty of Tordesillas. While most of the Americas had not been properly explored and mapmaking still had several flaws, the general idea was that in theory Spain was allowed to colonize everything west of the line, and that included the Guyana Highlands. However, there were issues following this treaty. As mentioned, mapmaking was not perfect, and there were several times where both Spain and Portugal colonized past the line and occasionally skirmished over disputed territory. Then you had other colonial powers who simply didn't care about the treaty in the first place, and they wanted their own colonies. One notable colonial power was the Netherlands, who were originally under control of Spain until they fought for independence in the early 17th century. The Netherlands ended up colonizing the coasts of modern-day eastern Guyana and Suriname. Spain eventually realized that the Treaty of Tordesillas was outdated, and they eventually made new treaties with their neighbors. For the Netherlands in particular, after decades of refusing to recognize their independence, they finally agreed to do so with the 1648 Peace of Münster. One of the stipulations of the Peace of Münster was that they would recognize the border of Dutch territories in Guyana along the Essequibo River. However, Guyana Essequiba as a region was still barely colonized by Spanish settlers, and of course there were indigenous people also still living there. The indigenous groups in the region would become allies with the Dutch, and this led to occasional Dutch attempts to colonize west of the Essequibo River. Sometimes Spain would fight these settlements, sometimes they wouldn't, but this would be the status quo until Napoleon changed everything. As Napoleon expanded French borders and influence across Europe, one of the early targets was the Netherlands. At first, they became a French puppet state known as the Batavian Republic, and then later got outright annexed into the French Empire in 1810. The British feared about France or one of its allies seizing Dutch colonies, so during this time they would occupy Dutch colonies around the globe, including the Dutch colonies in Guyana. In 1815, with the Congress of Vienna re-establishing peace in Europe at Napoleon's defeat, the British gave the Dutch back modern-day Suriname, but decided to keep their territories in modern-day Guyana, calling it British Guiana. One of the other unintended consequences of Napoleon's campaigns in Europe was his invasion of Spain resulted in most of Spain's Latin American colonies rebelling for independence. Originally, Venezuela was a part of the state of Gran Colombia, but after that country split off, Venezuela became independent in 1830. Now, the border is once again opened up for dispute. From Venezuela's point of view, they believed that they inherited the border from the Peace of Münster, from while they were a Spanish colony. The British, however, disagreed, as from their point of view, they never signed that treaty, so it was something they never agreed to, and the area was largely unsettled anyway. The British would try to use geographical boundaries to determine how far west they believed British Guiana could go, basing it along river deltas or mountain ranges, but they arrived at different conclusions. Regardless, since the area was still largely unsettled aside from the indigenous population, both countries mostly just asserted their claims and kept it as a fuss. However, gold mines found in the territory kept it an issue for both sides. Eventually, in 1895, Venezuela tried to lobby the United States into using its Monroe Doctrine policy to force the British to agree to Venezuela's claims. The United States did not want war to break out, so they decided to convince the British to agree to an international arbitration over the matter. In 1899, the arbitration reached a settlement, voting to partition the disputed territory and establishing the current border. While the line is somewhat only half the distance of the furthest British claim, Venezuela still heavily protested the matter, as not only did they still, in their perspective, lose a lot of territory to the British, but they also lost most of the gold mines. Across the 20th century, Venezuela continued to protest the results, and occasionally there were fears of an invasion of British Guyana. In 1966, British Guyana earned independence as Guyana, and Venezuela did react by annexing a few tiny islands along the border at the coast, but has otherwise not conducted a full-scale invasion, at least at the time of this video. In 2018, Guyana asked the International Court of Justice to weigh in on the matter, hoping to resolve the dispute. Venezuela believes that the ICJ has no right to rule in the matter, and the discovery of oil in the disputed region has flared up the dispute once again. Most recently, in late 2023, Venezuela set up a referendum on annexing the disputed territory, and on December 3rd, the referendum passed. The referendum, however, did not involve people living in the disputed territory, nor was it approved by either Guyana or the UN. With tensions at an all-time high over the region, there are possibilities of an invasion, with no one knowing how much it would escalate. At the very least, I hope this video has at least helped clarify how the dispute arose in the first place. I'm Emperor Tigerstar, and I'll see you guys next time.